Hello and welcome back to another comic book blueprint where I take a comic that I'm working on and break down my process and thoughts on how I make comics. So far we've designed one of our main characters, we've come up with our script, so now it's time that we put pencil to paper or pen to pixel depending on your preference. Anyway, let's get into comic book penciling where we can take our comic and make it come to life with stunning visuals. Okay, so stunning is a strong word when describing my penciling. Generally, my work is very simple and fast-paced because I'm trying to get this comic done on a strict schedule. This, of course, is not a real excuse. Many professional comic artists can whip out fantastic-looking work like this in the time it takes me to work on one single panel. But the main idea of the penciling stage isn't to create some masterpiece right off the bat. Obviously, it'll help you in the inking stage if you do make your work clear, but the point of starting in pencils is to rough in what you're trying to convey on page from your earliest thumbnails. For this video, I'll show you two panels from my comic DFD, in a digital format and in a traditional one. This way I can illustrate my point and try out some new things, since I generally don't use digital for this stage, but I have a new tablet, so I want to see if it's good enough for me to switch over to a completely digital process. Let's start with how I usually work. I'm working with a 12x9 piece of Bristol board. I'm using a ruler to mark off my trim areas based on the 1280 by 800 pixel size that webcomics usually are. Make sure to double check whatever platform you plan on posting your webcomic on before you start drawing, since reformatting a page size is a pain in the butt, especially if you're working from traditional to digital, so just look it up. Usually the information is found on the main publishing page. For the size of paper, my working area is 6.5 by 11 inches. I'm putting the equation for how I came up with that measurement up on screen because explaining it doesn't make any sense to me because math is the dumb one, not me.
I am too smart. I am too smart. I am too smart.
The materials I'm using can be found in any craft store. Pencils, erasers, and Bristol board. Bristol board is a little bit thicker than cardstock, so it can take whatever abuse I dish out to it. It's also going to last a lot longer than any normal piece of sketchbook paper as it won't tear, stain, or get ripped. It's also insanely satisfying to draw an entire comic out on Bristol board and then do this. Even if you don't find yourself inking traditionally, I still recommend using Bristol board for your penciling stage so that your work is preserved, and you don't have to worry about losing your pages should something happen to your digital scans. Once I have my pages formatted and labeled, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the rough shapes of the scene. I'm using my thumbnail sketches as reference, taking my incredibly rough and quick sketches from before and translating them to the page in a light blue pencil. This particular pencil lead will not show up when I scan the page later, so I can make my rough sketches without worrying that they will be too distracting later. At this point, everything that I'm doing is very foundational. I'm not trying to get facial expressions or obsess over every detail, I just want the main idea and the composition to come through. When I'm sketching just one panel, I have a lot of room to think about how I want the scene to go, how I want the composition to shape up. But at the same time, I am limited by just this one illustration because I can't break down the scene as much as I can with traditional comics. Yes, I can add more panels to the script or break down the scene in other ways, but this is something that I have observed while working on webcomics. You don't have to focus so much on the readable composition of a large page because there is no page. There's just the screen, and there's only so much that you can fit on that screen, so usually you're only drawing 1 to 2 images per panel. And by the way, when I say panel, I mean the 1280 by 800 pixel space that makes up one kind of page area. I made a video talking about it, the scripting video. Anyway. Hi, this is Editing Ruben, and I forgot to record this line, so I'm going to do it live and uncut, just like the video clip that you're seeing right now. Well, not this clip, because this clip is sped up really fast so that this video isn't forever long, but if you do want to watch this entire process where I am rambling on and on about my comic and how I make it and what I'm thinking about while I'm penciling, then go click the link that's going to pop up here, or check the description, or, you know, go to my channel and just look for it yourself like a pirate looking for buried treasure. But anyway, you can see the entire process there, where I rant and ramble, kind of like I'm doing right now, and maybe you'll learn something new about me, or penciling, or, you know, you'll never watch a video of mine ever again because you're wondering why I put out such low quality videos. But anyway, back to the show. With my rough sketch lightly penciled in, I'm moving to a normal graphite pencil to begin blocking in my character. This is where having a character sheet is especially handy because drawing a character from memory, even your own character, is difficult, especially when you have a dozen or so pages to do and tight deadlines that restrict how much time you can spend on each page. I'm trying to keep the anatomy in mind while I draw, although I'll admit that my style is a bit rougher for some of this. This is probably due to the fact that I haven't been practicing as much, which goes to show you that you should always be practicing anatomy and gesture sketches, even when you're working on big comic projects. While I'm working, however, I do use the anatomy models that I have on my desk for reference, as well as action figures to help me with the pose and general figure of the character. I'm also using references from my computer to help me draw out anything that is important to the scene, but generally I leave any background elements or props for later. Usually when it comes to background, I'm using either 3D models or an image that I draw over using Clip Studio Paints, filters, and other libraries of cool 3D stuff. Sometimes, however, you can't find something in those libraries fast enough, or you already have such a good idea that you do just have to draw it yourself. But for me, I prefer doing that on a computer rather than on paper, as I tend to obsess over little things like architecture and other details when I'm just sitting there with a pencil and seemingly endless time. And I would much rather do that on a computer where I can move those details around much easier than I could if I was on paper. So I don't get obsessed with drawing pillars and then completely losing track of time and then finding out that I drew that pillar in the wrong space. Whereas digitally, I could just draw the pillar anywhere and then move it and scale it as I need. With the figure and general composition sketched out, I can go ahead and start shading the scene. For Death's Favorite Daughter, I'm not really using an ink-heavy style, so the shading isn't as important in this stage. For my other comic work, where I am using traditional inks and heavier, more dramatic styles of inking, I make sure to shade in larger areas with more graphic shapes. One of the main concepts I've had for this comic since the beginning is to be very colorful and exciting, so I don't want to overly shade my piece and limit my mood opportunities for color later, so I'm leaving it fairly open. I'm not shading too much with my pencil, and I also won't be filling in too much with ink later. This is something that you want to figure out before you start working on your comic. Since art styles change and ideas evolve, you want to make sure that you pin down exactly what you want for your comic style to look like, whether that is more graphic and flat, or more loose and colorful, or more dependent on line work and tones to describe your scenes. Whatever you want your end result to be, you need to prepare for that in this stage. For me, the color is going to carry most of the duties of the shading and the form, so the pencils and line work don't have to be as elaborate, even though it pains me because I really love inking and cross-hatching and all that wonderful detail, but it's gonna take too much time for just this webcomic project. Okay, so that's about it for this page. Let's take a look at how I would do this digitally with a different page. Okay, I'm working in Clip Studio Paint, where I've already set up a document with all of the pages that I'm working on and have finished for this chapter of DFD. This is really handy because I can see all of the pages together and preview how the reader will see them. There's also a lot of cool tools that I can use that will speed up some of this process, as well as make the more complicated scenes easier to do. That being said, this is where we get into the what is cheating in art conversation. So while I rough out my scene using 3D models or images, let me explain my stance on this and let you form your own opinion on whether or not I'm quote-unquote cheating in art, and whether you want to quote-unquote cheat in art. When it comes to comic making, speed and accuracy is a factor. You're going to have to draw things that you never thought you had to draw, and you're going to have to come up with solutions to problems on the fly. This is part of the thrill and enjoyment of working in comics, but I have noticed that this is also a massive use of the limited time that I have for each page. I'm not saying that figuring out how to draw something or coming up with a solution wastes time, but it does eat into the other parts of the process, so you have to either become faster as an artist, which will take time and experience, and believe me, I believe you should do those things, or you could also, in these early stages, find ways to shortcut like many other professional comic book artists do. A lot of these shortcuts can be considered cheating, and I'm not going to argue whether or not it is actually cheating or not, because at the end of the day, it comes down to your personal preference and your workload. I'm not going to tell someone that using 3D models is the best way to draw backgrounds every single time, because it's not. Sometimes you just have to sit down and draw the church interior, or draw the car, or draw the bush or the tree. But at the same time, I'm not going to rail on an artist for using Google Maps to help with the background of a comic with 50 pages, because I know how time-consuming getting a scene finished is, especially when you aren't getting paid for your work just yet. As an indie creator, I have to consider how much time I'm spending on this unpaid work and how much, time that takes away from me maybe doing paid work. So yeah, I'm going to be using some shortcuts and things that might be considered cheating. But at the same time, I'm still going to be practicing my skills and getting to the point where I no longer need those. I think especially for new artists or amateurs like me, you shouldn't limit your toolbox just yet. As you get better and more experienced, you can start to cut out some of those shortcuts and training wheels. But for your first couple projects where you're just trying to make something of your own for the first time, I think it's okay to use some of these methods. Just don't rely too heavily on them instead of working hard. Trust me, you want to practice your fundamentals, you want to learn how to do these things, because eventually, it's going to be more time consuming to use these shortcuts and these training wheels rather than it is to just sit down and draw the scene from your own mind. When it comes to penciling digitally, you can almost skip this step entirely and just move on to line work. However, I would suggest at least having a sketch layer, especially since with digital art, it's easy to get final looking results a little too fast. This is usually why I like penciling using traditional methods, as the sketchier the page looks, the less I'm willing to accept that I have the scene fully rendered the way that I want it to be. Your biggest enemy in the penciling phase is to think that you are ready for the inking phase before you really are. If you start inking too early over unfinished pencils, it'll just result in lackluster work, or you will just be confused with what you were trying to draw and have to spend more time with the page than is necessary, so just take your time and get the penciling right. I will say, as far as this page goes, I think I do prefer the digital method a little bit more, as I have a lot more freedom to break down all the complicated parts of this page and move them around until I have the composition right where I want it. I do miss some of the feel and exploration that the pencil and paper gives me, and probably won't transfer over completely to digital for every comic project, but I can't deny that I do enjoy how this page turned out. With both of these pages completed, we can go ahead and get these ready for inking, which that stage will be covered in the next comic book blueprint video. Trust me, that's one that will have a lot more satisfying work to look upon than this one. This one's a lot more sketchy. That one's gonna have some nice crisp lines. I just can't wait to get to that one. I love inking. Thank you all for watching. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you leave any comments or questions down below. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. And until next time, go make something awesome.